Okay. Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome back as we begin our last session of what's been a very full and I hope very stimulating day for you. I'm sure you feel the way I do. After the opening panel, after the workshop, after a break to connect with each other, I feel troubled by reality. The situation is as bad as we thought. It's frightening and it's painful. But I'm also inspired by our guests. Despite the magnitude of the challenges, Israeli civil society is acting powerfully in extraordinarily difficult circumstances to get a better future, to get to a better future. I believe that Israeli society has within it the strength, the ideas, and the determination to lead us all from tragedy to peace. Our opening session talked about the past. Our workshops looked at the present. So now let's reconvene our panel to look squarely at the future. What will it take to get us out of this quagmire? What do they recommend? What must we do to prevent future October 7th, future days like yesterday and last night, and more Gaza wars? After this discussion, we'll end our day with closing remarks by our friend and former Canadian ambassador to Israel, Jon Allen. But first, our panel. So to moderate this the last panel, let me welcome Gabriella Goliger, who I'm sure is familiar to many, if not most of you. She's the national chair of Canadian Friends of Peace Now, a position she's held for more than 10 years, and she's been an active board member of that organization since the 1980s. Launched in 1983, CFPN supports Peace Now, Shalom Achshav in Israel, and advocates in Canada for a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Gabriella.
Thank you very much, Linda. We'll get right to it, and I'm going to ask each one of our panelists a question relating to how do we get there from here. We know the two-state solution is very desirable, but is it possible? How do we achieve this? And I'm going to start with Gil. I'd like to start with you, Gil. Your institution has created a detailed roadmap for achieving the two-state solution. So I'd like you to give us the short and long-term steps in a nutshell, and even how do we prevent the spiraling escalation of the conflict that we find ourselves in right at this moment?
Thank you very much. I think that short term, I'm going to really do that in a nutshell because we had an entire discussion about that. But short term, it's also based on the insights of our mutual discussion earlier. We need to focus on the immediate needs when it comes to humanitarian strategy and the shift from a state of warfare into a state of political action. And part of the connection, let's say, between the short term and the long term is what I repeated again and again. So excuse me, the members of my forum, the power of practice, because we need to be able to present a political horizon. We need to do the overarching things, but we also have to change reality on the ground for Israelis and Palestinians. And it relates to security. It relates to the feeling of a building of statehood and some kind of a shared future. But it also relates to the sense of honor and the ending of a state of ongoing humiliation. Again, we tend to put emotions aside, but they are super crucial in this specific experience. This is part of creating a new narrative. And in our situation, as I mentioned before, we just don't have any other choice. The implications of not moving in that direction are grim. I was asked before at the corridor there about two-state, one homeland, or the one-state solution, and so on. And I said the same thing I'm probably going to repeat here. When it comes to the two-state solution, I adopt the same concept that Churchill had regarding democracy, that it's the worst kind of solution except of all the others. And you know what? When you look at the surveys, including in the PA or in the West Bank until recently, you see somewhat the same notion. So part of what we need to do is to get down to the details and try to reappropriate the practice altogether. That's the short term. The long term, I think one of the crucial things that we need to do is to build Palestinian statehood while supplying security for the Israeli long-term security, change the Israeli perception about security. Maybe relating also a little bit to what Nadav said, the ability to understand that it's not just about the military act, the limitations of the military action, the limitations of working alone, Israel as without its allies. And I think the events of the last 24 hours helps us get or realize or come to terms with the reality that for Israel to thrive, or to let alone to survive, basically, we need to be able to look at the craft of diplomacy, of negotiations, our commitment to the two-state solution as a crucial and necessary part of our pathway forward, and not just as a complementary part to our military might. So that's in general terms.
Can I just ask you a quick follow-up to that? But a question that has been on my mind is, so Iran has just fired a whole bunch of missiles. What should Israel do now?
Okay. Now, one thing I have to say, I mean, something happened 24 hours ago, less than 24 hours ago. It's going to be very easy for me to come and say, Israel should sit on its hands, basically, and let this cycle of escalation end. But we also have to understand that an attack on Israeli territory from Iran, which was not symbolic, climbing up in the ladder of escalation to the level of firing hundreds of missiles and drones on Israel, it is not something that Israel cannot retaliate against. The question is, what is the retaliation? If Israel is able to harness this specific event in order to promote the concept of an alliance of moderates, the damage to Iran is going to be much larger than attacking a specific target. So the question is, how do you do that? How do you preserve deterrence? We are dealing with realpolitik here. We're dealing with actual balance of threat, with equations, so on. So I don't think that the military aspect should be completely marginalized or omitted, but it should come together with some kind of a political plan. The best remedy on that case vis-a-vis Iran is the ability to promote normalization and the two-state solution. In the end, in the long run, that's the most stable strategy vis-a-vis Iran and its targets and objectives in the region.
Thank you. My next question will be for Rebecca. So Rebecca, your organization, Gishas, is focused on the humanitarian situation in Gaza primarily. So what needs to be done short-term and long-term to address the plight of Gaza civilians? And how will these measures contribute to long-term peace building?
Thanks. So I'll just briefly give a bit of context about the work that we're doing on this specifically. So about 9 days ago, Gishas had a hearing in the Israeli High Court. We petitioned the High Court to increase the aid, specifically the aid making its way to the north in Gaza, obviously in the context of the humanitarian catastrophe, which is most severe in the north in Gaza. And there anyone who speaks Hebrew, you can also watch the hearing. It was live streamed on YouTube by the court itself. But there we talked about the measures that Israel needs to take to start to improve and address the humanitarian disaster. So I will go into some details about that. But the thing I want to say before that is that none of the measures that we suggested, and including the ones which Israel has said that it will take up, will mean anything without a ceasefire. There is no way to address this humanitarian catastrophe without a ceasefire. You can talk to any aid worker on the ground and they'll tell you that this level of catastrophe can't be solved with only 1 or 2 entry points, with the aid workers being targeted, with the blockades that are in place, with Israel failing to militarily secure those aid workers and actually instead targeting them. So none of this can really be addressed without a ceasefire. Having said that, there are some things that we put forward as ways that can improve the situation. some of which Israel responded to, some of which they didn't. So an example of one that Israel hasn't responded to is the sourcing of aid. So at the moment, due to an Israeli policy decision, none of the aid that the international community is purchasing can be purchased within the West Bank or in Israel. That's a blanket ban on purchasing, for example, flour or any medical assistance, anything like that, from the West Bank or from Israel. So that means that everything has to come from Egypt or Jordan instead, which is obviously very detrimental to the sourcing. Some other things are increase in fuel. At the moment, Israel is still capping the fuel which can come into Gaza. So an increase in that cap to allow for more electricity, to allow the grid in Gaza to actually have electricity, which it hasn't had since October 11th, which would also in turn allow water to be pumped into homes in Gaza, and to allow for the humanitarians to actually do their jobs. Also, turning the electricity back on. The two power lines, which provide 2/3 of the electricity in Gaza, which the PA purchases from Israel, have been switched off for the entirety of the war as part of the siege policy. So to turn that back on, to have more transparency and also more flexibility in the dual use items. So actually and this will come into my long-term recommendations as well, to allow for items which are needed for rebuilding and reconstruction to actually come into Gaza, because at the moment, many of them are being turned away as dual use items, as well as whole trucks of aid sometimes being turned away because something's on it which Israel doesn't want to let in, or because things aren't packaged in the right way. Those kind of things also contributing to the bottlenecks. Deconfliction, as I talked about, not targeting of the aid workers or of the aid convoys, World Central Kitchen being a very pertinent example, but not the only example. That's really important. Coordinating to get aid up to the north. In the month of March, Israel refused 30% of the missions to the north. So to actually not impede those missions, to open Ashdod port to be used for aid shipments. Aid ships can bring a lot more than airplanes. So even though at the moment, because Port Said is very far away from Gaza, Al Arish Airport is being used in Sinai, but a lot more aid could come if Ashdod was opened, which is the closest seaport to Gaza. Opening of more crossings, the Gate 96 so-called, which is a crossing that's opened in the north of Gaza near Kibbutz Be'eri, has only been used a handful of times. Israel has now said it will open Erez crossing, so to actually see that through and open all of the crossings that are needed to bring aid in. All of these are kind of the short-term Israeli policy recommendations that we would make to increase the aid and to alleviate the humanitarian catastrophe. And then in the longer term, it's about access. It's one of the things. And all of that access that I'm talking about, I mean, this humanitarian catastrophe is not going to be solved even in the medium term. So increasing, consistent access. But more importantly, for the kind of the building of a viable Palestinian state is access between the West Bank and Gaza, and the ability for those economies, those societies, those shared cultures to actually be one contiguous state would need Gaza not to be isolated in the way that it's being isolated now. And as I mentioned, also to allow the materials that will be needed for the rebuilding of Gaza eventually on the day after. And obviously, when we talk about one state, two state, everything that, we've had mentioned, that the most important thing being any solution which guarantees the human rights for everyone in the region.
Thank you. Mauricio, Peace Now is primarily concerned with developments in the West Bank. What needs to change in Israeli policy and actions to create conditions for a two-state solution? And what is Peace Now doing to further that goal, please?
Well, first of all, everything needs to change. And this is the sad reality. The path that our government chose to take, it is, and it was, and it will be the most dangerous path that we can follow. But I think that one of the things that we need to do, and this is an urgent thing, is that we need to start to convince the Israeli people, the Israeli public, that a two-state solution is the only way that will get the security we deserve. And that's why we decided after 6 months of this terrible war that this is the right time to start campaigning. Even though we know that most of the people will say, wow, these people are crazy, why they're talking now about the two-state solution. This is a prize for Hamas or for Palestinians. But the truth is that a two-state solution, it is a prize. But it is a prize for Israelis, first and foremost, and for moderate Palestinians. This is the only way that we can, in some way or somehow, to defeat Hamas. You cannot kill an idea with guns. You can wage a war for years and years and years, and we've seen in many cases in history, we've seen in the Middle East, that the eternal wars at the end, they only strengthen the radicals and weaken the moderates. So we need to start from there. We need to start giving a political horizon for Palestinians. We need to start explaining to Israelis and to everyone why a political solution will bring security, why secure borders is what will give us the chance to protect our country from different threats that we'll have and we had in the past and in the future. It's also a way to recognize that at the end of the day, political agreements, peace agreements is the only thing that bring us some sense of security and hope. And maybe only after we understand the importance of these agreements, the importance of looking at the future, not only in a way that thinking that war is the only way, but that the other ways, only then we will be able to get the peace that we all want. And I believe that most of the people in Israel, even if they're right-wing, left-wing, center, religious, secular, or whatever else, most of the people, I think it's a natural essence of the human being. They want to live in peace. They want to raise their children. They want to have some kind of normal life. And I think the same about the Palestinians that are going through also a very extremely traumatic event as this war. I truly believe that most of the Palestinians want to live. They want to have that sense of security that they deserve. But we also need to consider that both societies, both groups now are going through a very traumatic experience with thousands of Palestinians and Gazans that were killed since the beginning of the war, with also all the hostages situation, that it's something that it will be really hard to overcome. And I cannot imagine how long it will take till Israelis will be able to get into some kind of recognition, and how we can overcome that. I don't think we'll be able to do that. I feel that as a person, as a human being, and I know that all of you think that all the situation with the hostages will follow us for many years. And my wish is that with a political solution, we'll not need to leave again, we'll not need to repeat these terrible things that happened since the 7th of October and before. And the only way to secure that is giving and understanding that a political solution, a two-state solution, is the path that we do not only need to choose, we must choose. And this is the right time to start working towards that future.
Okay. Thank you. Let's hear from each of you what you think the main obstacle is towards moving forward. And, you know, I can think of a few, but I'm sure you can too. I'll let, I don't know who wants to start with that one. Okay, Nadav.
I think first and foremost, as I said before, we cannot look at Gaza as a military problem, and it doesn't have a military solution, obviously, and I think that the one that with me the break room already heard that, but the leading paradigm in the IDF about how we fight in South Lebanon, by the way, and Gaza as well, it's called the Dacha doctrine. And if the IDF thinks like that, so we're in a forever war. Let me explain. Okay, Dacha, it's a Shiite quarter in Beirut, where a lot of Hezbollah offices were located. And during the Second Lebanese War in 2006, we annihilated from the air. Why? Because the IDF believes that's the Dacha doctrine, that also is called the Eisenkot doctrine, because Gadi Eisenkot developed that, says that because we're fighting a non-state actor, Hezbollah in the north or Hamas in the south, in an asymmetrical war, we are a standard army, they are militants, hiding in civilian villages, we cannot win. Like the old traditional winning of an Israeli soldier planting an Israeli flag on a base somewhere. The only thing that we can do is make the rounds of fighting as farther as we can from one another. And that's a forever war. And how you do that? You create unproportional damage to civilian infrastructure. Okay, tunnels, roads, bridges, electricity facilities, water pumps, but also government offices. And because of that, Hezbollah in the north and Hamas in the south would have to rebuild the civilian infrastructure and not buy new missiles and building more bunkers. It failed in South Lebanon, and it failed in Gaza, right? This is the method that we're fighting in Gaza, in Kastled in 2009, Protective Edge 2014, and now. And it doesn't work, and it creates huge damage to civilian infrastructure, and it is one of the reasons why you have such a huge amount of Palestinian casualties. And this is how the IDF fights, right? When, according to international media, when we attack in Syria and Lebanon, in Hebrew it's called the Mabam, המערכה שבין המלחמות. It means the small battles between the big wars. It's always about that. It's a forever war. Right? So if we want to look at the future, or we want a future, we need to stop doing that, right? Because we fell in love, not now, years ago, in fighting. And we always need to fight, and we have to live on the tip of our sword and all of that, and everybody is against us. But again, what happened in the last 24 hours, I hope it will change it for a lot of Israelis. So we need to uproot that main paradigm in the IDF. And I think, you know, the IDF really influenced the political system in Israel and also the public, right? The IDF is supposed to take the commands from our government and execute them, but we know that the IDF, like every other army, has its own policy that is pushing, right? And this is one of those. So again, if we want a future, we need to stop looking at the present only as military targets and targets and targets and targets.
I just want to ask you a follow-up question, Nadav, and maybe somebody else would want to answer too. I'm sure a lot of people, though, ask, Hamas is committed to Israel's destruction, and they've built all these, have this huge infrastructure below ground, and they've managed to get all these weapons. So, you know, they don't want peace. So how do you tackle that?
Yeah. So first of all, you know, I fought Hamas in Gaza, and I fought Hamas in the West Bank. I know who's Hamas militants. I know people that died in the hands of Hamas. I don't think they're like a human rights organization, but I can tell you that all of the tunnels that we have, there's an underground city, right, in Gaza, and all of the weapons. I don't know if you understand. Right. I was asked to speak slowly, so I speak slowly. Sorry. There's so many things to say about the occupation. One of the things that was really revealed to the IDF in this war is the crazy amount of weapons and ammunition that Hamas have. It is a huge amount. And it shows us that the siege didn't work, right? From 2017 now, what Rebecca explained to us very clearly, there's a siege. but it's a siege on the day-to-day Gazans, right? Hamasniks, maybe they live good, but obviously they built all of this. And yes, it is almost impossible to fight a group like Hamas when they are hiding inside civilians. I fought in urban surroundings a lot of times, and I even fought in Gaza, and it's almost impossible, right? So for sure, the answer to that, to Hamas, won't be what we are doing now. Gil mentioned before separating, that the separation as one of the main policies of the occupation. We are separating between the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. We are separating between Palestinians and settlers. We are separating between Palestinians and their land, right? So that very artificial separation between the West Bank and Gaza created a vacuum, by the way, that Hamas entered, right? So I think that if we look at former operation, all of the operation in Gaza before this ended by us signing a deal with Hamas, right? More nautical miles for fishing, more trucks, more all kinds of things. So we can speak with Hamas. I don't think now it's a possibility, like, to have a deal with Hamas. No, like, they're like lunatics over there. But I think that you know, when the time is right, we will have to do it. Like, we will be neighbors, right? We're neighbors. We're going to live next to the Gazans, and they're going to live next to us. So we have no other option to do it. I'm not sure now it's the best time to do it. But again, there's always an option, but squeezing a trigger, right? There's always an option.
Yeah. Thank you. Go ahead, Gil. You want to add?
No, I mean, I agree completely, by the way, with the idea that in the last 3 or 4 decades, maybe all the way since 67, we are slowly becoming a nation of hunters instead of statesmen and women, basically people that deal with political, and that's part of also the discussion about the attack in Damascus that has an operational value, but again, the inability to resist the temptation, because we are always focusing on something that is called in Hebrew bank matarot, the target bank. And everything is led by the military because there's no other, everything else is futile. And that's part of the Mabam, the war between the worlds. They're coming to terms with the fact that there won't going to be any solution. There's no use to offer any initiative. So we are just going to have to live with reality and try to improve our situation. Every couple of years is going to be a peak of violence. And the only thing we can do is try to improve our situation from one peak to another. Of course, already in 2021, for those of you who remember Guardian of the Walls, that failed. From each peak, our situation is getting worse, but the solutions that we find to those problems are technical military instead. In some point, Mabam, the war between the worlds, lacking some kind of a political vision, became the vision. The only thing that Israel had, other than the only strategy that Israel had, was regarding the settlements. And when it comes to the strategy of Israel towards its enemies, towards its foes and neighbors, a military, a tactical even, or operational policy became the main issue instead of a political issue. And that's exactly what happens to us when we become hunters, where the Israeli media is more focused on if Marwan Issa was killed or not, number 3 or number 5 in Hamas, the body count, instead of the larger effects on the system. And that's something that poisons the thought, the way we do things. This is not part of the mission statement of the State of Israel, who knew how to use the diplomatic, who really pursued peace. Rodef Shalom means that in every opportunity that you get, no matter how meager, you are trying to make the extra point. But I do not think, by the way, regarding Hamas, I think that, there are some signs because of Sinwar, because of his actions that, according to some sources, was not coordinated with the political leadership of Hamas in Qatar, that there are some rifts or some clashes even between the, let's call it the suicidal wing of Hamas, Sinwar and so on, and between the political leadership. It is still to be examined, and it remains to be examined whether or not we can speak about the PLOization of Hamas, meaning Hamas getting closer and closer to a situation where they can accept the quartet conditions. I mean, the concept of respecting previous agreements in Israel. Until then, Hamas, in my book, is a disaster for the two-state solution. That's the organization that in the 90s was pivotal in stopping the process of the Oslo Accords, Oslo process, and since then has become stronger and stronger as a spoiler of any possibility of Israeli Palestinian engagement. And we should treat them as we treat the extreme right in Israel until then. And the international community should take a strong position vis-a-vis Hamas in that aspect. And I don't think we should show any weakness vis-a-vis Hamas. I know that we are talking about peace and two-state solution, but it also requires placing very clear red lines on that situation. So at the current moment, I don't see an opening for discussion. There's something about including civil servants from Hamas in the future mechanism in Gaza. We can get into it. But the biggest obstacle that I identify, and this is, maybe I'm supposed to speak about Iran, about Russia, but I'm going to speak about something very basic and psychological. The biggest obstacle, I think, is that we are experiencing an ongoing trauma. We spoke about it a little bit before, and we don't really have closure in this situation because of the hostages issue. It's a daily repetition of October 7th. There are complaints in Israel that the international media or other actors do not speak about October 7th and only speak about the ensuing war, out of context, basically. In Israel, it's the opposite. We are stuck in October 7th, in mindset, in emotions, in everything. And we can understand why. Every day where there's new evidence about sexual violence that are being exposed, every day that there's all kinds of speculations about how many hostages are still alive, this is an ongoing trauma that Israel has never experienced before. And it drives people. We spoke about humiliation and honor. I remember Palestinian colleagues that used to say that there was something about the ability to hurt Israelis that provide them with some kind of comfort because they felt so passive before. And I remember it was really hard for me to understand what they are talking about, hurting Israelis for the sake of hurting them, and I think that now we experience it from the Israeli side, this strong and deep animosity. And to go from there to a place where you can speak about some kind of coexistence requires work. And that's already in the HOP section, so I'm not going to go into that.
Okay. Rebecca, yeah, you should speak next. And we'll go to, I had skipped a question from Nadav, so we're back now on the obstacles. Doesn't matter. Rebecca, what do you feel are one or two of the biggest obstacles to peace, to creating?
I think that there's so many things, obviously, as with any complex problem. But I think that it's back. I spoke about this a bit in the breakout session, so sorry for the repetition for the people who were kind enough to join me. But my generation is the generation of the shadow of the failure of Oslo. I was born in the mid-90s. And I think that, I have a good friend, I mentioned this before, she was born precisely because of the Oslo Accords. Her parents decided, now we can have a child in Israel. Now it's ethical and acceptable to do so because there's going to be peace. And I think that my generation is totally marred by this shadow. And I think that it creates a huge amount of apathy in the younger generation. There isn't really a belief in, as you talked about, political engagement as a means to create a better future. And I think this also speaks to another one of the obstacles, which is, I think, the success of the dehumanization, particularly of Gaza, where it's somewhere that obviously we can't go and see for ourselves, we can't meet, we can't have encounters, but to an extent, the dehumanization of all Palestinians. And probably it's mutual. I don't know. I can't speak for the other side, but I think the success of this dehumanization and this lack of empathy can't be understated. And unfortunately, I think it adds to the apathy, because not only is there a lack of belief in the process, but there's a lack of will to even enter into it and a lack of motivation. And I think these things are part of the policies of the occupation. I think that there's an interest in that dehumanization. There's an interest in cutting off Gaza. I think that all of those things are massive problems that need to be addressed. I think from the international community side, I think that one of the obstacles is Israel's impunity, that Israel continually crosses red lines, and the red lines continually seem to move to accommodate those crossings. I think that again, it creates a lack of interest and motivation in the rule of law and in creating peace. And the final thing I'll say is that I think it goes with the kind of success of the dehumanization. I think that there's a lot of discrediting of Palestinian voices worldwide. And I think that we've really seen that since October 7th. I field questions all the time about the credibility of the sources inside Gaza. And, with my practical hat on, I can say that, there's international bodies on the ground, that we can listen to them, that Israel should let in more impartial journalists, all of those things. But of course, what I want to say is, why don't you believe Palestinians? And I think that there's been a very successful discrediting, which again acts as a massive barrier to peace.
Yeah, can I just ask you a devil's advocate question here, Rebecca? Because when those questionings about the data, they're usually phrased as these are Hamas-controlled sources. So how do you answer that? I mean, the health authority is supposedly controlled by Hamas and even UNRWA. So yeah.
Sure. Again, sorry for the repetition of my previous session, but I can happily talk about those numbers, but and I will now. But I think that there's also an important caveat and an addition that I'll add to that. But regarding the numbers, I think it is pretty much understood by experts worldwide that the numbers are likely to be a massive underestimate. That it's very difficult at the moment to collect all of the data about the casualties and about the people under the rubble, about the unidentifiable bodies. And I think that, as we've seen from previous operations, the numbers tend to be very, close to the numbers that the Israeli military also rely on and use. We've seen the Biden administration also talk about reliance upon those numbers. So I think, we can talk about the numbers and why I think that those numbers are an underestimate. But I think more than that, we can talk about testimony. I didn't have time today, but we've been collecting testimony of people from the north of Gaza, people who are drinking salty water and people who are worried about their children being malnourished. And I think that beyond the data, what about the human stories? And I think that those human stories are also discredited and they're seen as politically motivated. And what do you do when sharing the story of you and your family and your food insecurity and your fear to go and pick up aid because you've seen that there's people, dying of airdrops being dropping on their heads, and that there's targeting of people who are trying to pick up aid, all of those stories. If you can't even share that because you're discredited and you're seen as having a political motivation, then how do you trust the world around you? How do you trust the idea of peace if no one even wants to hear about your story?
So Maurizio, I'll ask you what you find are the biggest obstacles to moving forward. You can choose whatever. I also have a couple of thoughts. So, but I'll.
So, in reality, the biggest obstacle for our future is our current government and the path that they chose for our country since they took power in December 2022. And I think that what this government represents is all our biggest fears that we had for many years. So I would say that the fear or the process that is happening right now, and it accelerated since October 7th, that this is very worrying and should worry all of us, the process of annexation, of closing the door for political solution. And this is very clear, and this was expressed many, many, many times by representatives of our government, senior ministers who are in charge of our destiny. So this is the first obstacle. And I think that at the end of the day, it became clear during the whole 2023 till the 7th of October that the occupation is the source of all these things that will happen, and I hope will not happen in the future. The occupation is the biggest threat to Israel's democracy and to Israel, and not only democracy, and pay attention to this. This is the biggest threat to the Jewish character of the state of Israel. The occupation is not something that comes together with Judaism. You can't use Judaism in order to justify the things that we're doing against Palestinians for many, many years. This is an anti-Jewish and anti-Zionist and a dangerous threat for the future of the state of Israel. So everyone should oppose that and should do everything here and in Israel to end that. And after the 7th of October, it became very clear that the occupation is also the source or the reason why we lack security. If before it was a threat to democracy, today, and the war also in Gaza is a threat to our security. So what I propose is, it's very clear, and this is something that we already been proposing for some months. Israel must stop this war immediately, must do everything, but completely everything, paying all the prices that we need to price in order to get back our hostages. Everything, all for all, whatever we need to do, we must do. This is something that we need to do because this is why our country was created, to protect the people. And this is our mandate, and this is what we need to do, and our government needs to accept that. There are people on the street fighting every week, every day. I see the families of the hostages standing outside the Kiryat, the Minister of Defense, every day under the rain, with more people, with less people, fighting for something that we should take for granted. This is about the security of civilians that woke up on the 7th of October, and the first thing they saw was a Hamas terrorist in front of them, taking them and their families, killing them. And this cannot be allowed. This is something that is fundamental for our future. After that, after we get back our hostages, we need to start pursuing a political solution. And only then, I think after we get into those three, of course, I'm not even saying that we need to oust our government and make sure that a government like this will never govern Israel, never again, because this is something, or this is the reason why we got into this situation. And this is something that we will need to fight for. It will take time. But again, I'm optimistic because I see people around the world standing for Israel, standing against the occupation, standing for peace. And I know that finally Israel will come, most of Israel will come to this understanding. Now I will believe in 73, after the terrible Yom Kippur War, that 5 years after we'll be signing a peace agreement with Sadat, and Sadat will be talking at the Knesset and all that. You can call me crazy. You can call all the people here that speak about peace, about a future, about reconciliation, about coexistence. You can call us crazy today. But I know that in 5 years or in 10 years, our vision will be the vision that will be adopted by Israel. And that's what will save our joint destiny, both for Israelis and both for Palestinians.
I'm going to throw out another question here that you talked, Mauricio, about ousting the government, and I'll let any one of you answer this, if whoever wishes. But what will it take to oust the government? And from my knowledge, most Israelis are not left-wing or even centrists. There's a strong right-wing trend. So what does it take to oust the government and get a better government?
So I can answer shortly and then I will pass, because I think the conception, I hate this word conception, but anyway, it exists, that Israel is divided between left wing and right wing and center. I don't think that's relevant anymore. I think the division, and we saw that in 2023 with the protest movement, the division in Israel is between liberals and conservatives, religious. And this is something that we need to understand in order to keep moving forward. I do not expect that most of Israelis will turn magically into left-wing human rights defenders and all kind of things. That will be a process. I hope we'll get into that point in the future. But what I do see is that we have partners, even right-wing partners, that they understand that there are rules that we need to respect, that democracy is a fundamental value for Israel. And I believe that if we get, and it happened before with this coalition for change, that actually what they changed, it was for worse, because they kept moving on the same trajectory that the former governments were moving. But when we will understand that our partners are those liberal people in Israel that you saw on the streets, that you will keep seeing on the streets, I think that after that, we will understand that the change is possible and a different government is possible and a different reality will be possible.
Yeah, I tend to agree that it only took us a couple of traumas. And I mean, I don't think that I ever seen in politics, global politics, a situation where people pay the price so quickly for the wrong decision in election, for a government which is shameful. To be honest, as an Israeli, I'm ashamed to speak about a government where the Minister of Internal Security is a convicted supporter of terrorism, when the Minister of, put aside Israeli Palestinian, the Minister of Interior Affairs used to serve time for bribery. I mean, it is, again, we are trying to go back to in many ways, to this elusive experience of bringing back the country that we are in love with. And we are asking ourselves if it still exists. And I was pretty skeptic a couple of years ago when after the first or second year when I came back from Germany back to Israel. But I have to tell you that this conflict, and it is unfortunate, it's only in conflict you find those places, but to see the incredible people of Israel, I know it sounds like a cliche, I've never seen such a huge difference between an incredible level of voluntarism. You mentioned the demonstration, but people that want to help, that are committed in this day and age to some kind of a broader vision and are looking for a way. And I think that today we are paying the prices of this specific government. I think Israelis learn what it means to have a full-fledged right-wing government. Memshelet Yamin al-Maleh, as it's called in Hebrew. The tangible, the real damages to their daily life. And this is something that sticks. And if I look at the surveys, and again, to look at surveys during a war, it's like, building bridges in an earthquake. But if you are looking at those surveys day in, day out, Netanyahu is not picking up steam. He's stuck on 18, 19 mandates. One of the things that the right wing was able to create, apropos your description, is a minority perception in the Israeli peace camp, left, liberal camp. We tend to think, because of a delegitimization process that the right wing has been committed, that to be a Smolani or to be liberal or pro-democratic, we are the crazy ones, we are in the margins. And slowly, and I think it started with the protest against the judicial reform, you find out that there's a lot like you. Maybe a little bit different, maybe still questioning, maybe still with open questions about certain things. We present a very simplistic approach regarding Israelis and Palestinians. There was a couple of times in this discussion that I thought to myself, wait a second, I feel like defending the Israeli side actually on this one and that one. There are open questions, but the ability to find public mandate for a new road, a new pathway is something that is unique right now in this specific point. So we need to get out of the minority perception, the self-perception that we have as a minority. We need to act like a camp. We weren't going to have a left-wing Kohelet. That's not part of our DNA in the Israeli left or center. I don't know what you're planning. I don't think that we can actually do this. Kohelet, you know what I mean, right? This, this effective octopus who can control the entire Israeli politics with specific messages and influence altogether and a lot of money. We weren't going to have this. But we can create an awareness of a camp with different organizations, each one fulfilling its own role, bringing their own added value, with our ship sailing in the right direction. Even if we have disagreement about specific things, about the pathways and about the goal, we need to look at ourselves as a political organization a little bit. If you don't mind me giving some credit to the gringos from the south of the border here, like they did after Trump, okay? From the trauma to build the new. That's what I think.
I want to add to that. I think one of our biggest problems is that we don't act as a political camp, right? If you look at the right wing in Israel, and we need to look at the right wing in Israel, they act as a camp. They have a lot of differences, but it's all silence because they have a camp and they know what they want to do, and they have like their goal, annexation, and taking the democracy in Israel and throw it to the trash can and all of that. And I think for that we need to be visible on the streets. What Gil now mentioned, the minority of thinking, and so we saw a wave in the Balfour protest during COVID against Benjamin Netanyahu. Suddenly, there's lots of people, and I used to walk over there in the demonstration, and I was so glad that I have a mask because it was COVID, because I was smiling all of the time, because there was suddenly thousands of people that think like me and protest like me. It's not like the 10 Israelis against the occupation in a protest. And there was an awakening. And then a lot of young Israelis started to get arrested by their dozens in every protest. And then suddenly the taboo is over. It's like when you smoke your first cigarette. I don't smoke. But when you smoke your first cigarette and you see that the sky didn't fall, exactly what happened over there. And we were visible over there. But then in the last year of protest against the judicial overhaul that we had in Israel, the anti-occupation bloc was small at the beginning. And there was lots of problems. People brought Palestinian flags and they got beaten by other protesters that came to defend the Israeli democracy, but they beat the guys with the Palestinian flag, and it was a whole thing. And then the anti-occupation bloc got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and not only in Tel Aviv, but also in Jerusalem, but also in Haifa, and even Beersheba. And then we decided, and other organizations decided to bring our information booth to Kaplan, to the main protest. And you know what happened? A lot of people came to us and said, hey, take a donation, or hey, I have a question, how you answer this or answer that, or can I come to your tours? And what happened for us in breaking the silence is that suddenly all of the buses to Hebron were full. We didn't have enough guides to take them because everybody did a connection. Why? Because we were visible on the ground, not only publishing on our social media, not only doing our activism on the ground in the West Bank, right? We were inside the Israeli public. And this is what the demonstration brought us, right? But also the understanding of civil society organization that we are the opposition. We don't have an opposition in the Israeli parliament. It doesn't exist, unfortunately, I said, right? And the only opposition is us. And when we were in the street, when people saw us, they came along, right? So if we want to take over, we have to take down this government, this crazy, Kahanist, government that believes in Jewish supremacy, that is lunatic, some part of it. So we have to be over there in the front line. I'm not saying let's fight with police officers. No, we need to be visible. When my mother and her friends, they go out to protest, they need to see us as well, right? And I think, I hope what we see in the last couple of weeks in Israel, when the protests become bigger because the families of the hostages said enough is enough, right? Benjamin Netanyahu is not going to free our family members. And when the two demonstrations in Tel Aviv, anti-Bibi or anti-government or elections now, and the families of the hostages got together, 50,000 Israelis on the streets. And I know here it doesn't sound a lot, but 50,000, it's a lot in Israel. And fires on Ayalon, the main highway in Tel Aviv, and parliament member from the Labour Party, Gilad Kariv, Naama Lazimi, are taking part of it, fighting with the police because they arrested people with no reason. you know, and because there's energy. And over there, I saw signs of reservists saying like, what did I fought for in Gaza, right? Now, I don't know if it's a wave of reservists, but still, it's because we're visible. It's because we're on the streets. People understand that you have to connect something. This morning, a friend of mine sent me a photo of a sign of peace now in Rothschild, I think. Yeah. In Rothschild, the two states, and said, oh, finally, it's not only signs, let's wipe out Gaza, like the settlers and right-winger are putting all of them, or we will win it together. ביחד ננצח. And no, really, what we're going to win. And that's something that for us, yes, we're activists, like that's our DNA to be on the ground, but I think that the general public understands that we have to do something, right? This government is crazy. And when people start to do something, usually it's on the right way, because the majority of Israelis, they were brought up on the set of values, just like your values and my values, democratic values, that people are equal. Doesn't matter where you came from or who you are or what's your last name or where you go to pray.
Thank you, Nadav. I'm going to ask you now a question. What is the hardest question that you are sometimes asked? And I'll let each of you respond to it. But I also have another question that that occurred to me as you're talking, and that is: are you, your organization, are you under threat from the authorities in some way? Like, are you able to operate freely, and or is there a problem? But anyway, let's start with the skeptical one. Rebecca, how about you? If you have a what's the hardest or question you're sometimes asked?
Sure. This is on. Yeah. Sure thing. So I think that I'm probably boring everyone at this point because I keep coming back to my same thing, which is Israel's obligations. It's what we do. I'm sorry. It's what I'm paid to do. But I think the most difficult questions are the ones which aren't factually incorrect, but aim to shift responsibility and aim to point fingers elsewhere. And I think it's really easy to get into a bit of a rabbit hole with those questions. I think that's kind of the aim of them. So people will often talk about all of the other actors in the region and globally who have responsibility, anything but taking responsibility yourself. So whether that's Hamas, Egypt, the UN, UNRWA in particular, whether that's, you know, the PA, the states, why aren't other Arab countries taking in Palestinians? That's a classic, you know, all of these questions. And we were just speaking about it before the panel began. Actually really welcome those questions, because I think if the biggest criticism that someone has of the points that you've made is like, what about that guy? Then you've probably done a pretty good job. But I think it's really easy to get into those rabbit holes and to start kind of to allow the goalposts to shift. And that's why I'm such a bulldozer and always bringing back to the kind of to our central issue, which is, well, what about our responsibilities? What about when we look in the mirror? Who are we? And who do we want to be at the end of this? Where do we want to have been? What do we want to have done? And it might be true, or it might be, you know, false that that we're surrounded by threats and that we have our backs against the wall. But there's always a choice, as all the panelists here have said. There's always a choice. There's always another way to do things. And the start of that is to look in the mirror. And I think that we get a lot of challenges that try to obfuscate and stop us from doing that. But I think, you know, we always have to bring it back to, what are we doing?
And by the way, the reason I'm asking this question is it gives us tools to talk to our families and friends. That's why we want to ask you the hard questions, or have you ask yourselves the hard questions and give us the answers. So who would like to go next on that? Okay, Mauricio.
Oh, hi.
Is it off?
There. Okay, here now. Thank you. So I must say that is a question that they always ask me, or they ask people from Peace Now, that it's kind of hurtful. Is do you still exist? That it happens, or why you still exist? It happens sometimes because it's a very veteran organization. We've been there on the ground for many years, but yes, we do still exist. Maybe with less support that we had in the 80s or in the 90s, but we still exist. That's the first. But I think the most challenging question is how you make peace with your enemies, or how you make peace with monsters, with terrorists, or whatever else. And my answer is with who you can make peace if it's not with your enemies. And even though if you really believe that the enemies are the most terrible people in the world, and they're probably Hamas people that are the most terrible people in the world, and they maybe believe that in Israel, in the government, those are the worst people in the world. But at the end of the day, we've seen in history, in many instances, that peoples make peace with their enemies. It happened in the past. Take a look at Europe, for example. Who would imagine that in 1940, this will be, so many years after, this will be the current situation, not including Brexit and everything, but still. Who would imagine that after so many, don't know, that will bring us an example, the genocide in Rwanda. Yes, and after some years, there was some kind of process for reconciliation, and that situation changed, and Hutus accepted Tutsis and the opposite, and there are many examples all around the world that conflicts can be resolved, and they are resolved because people understand that at the end of the day, the one that is in front is the future partner. We can have a hot peace, a cold peace. We can separate ourselves from Palestinians. We can have economical relations. We can have diplomatic relations. I don't know. But at the end of the day, we must accept that a peace you make with your enemies, not with your friends. There is no need to make peace with your friends. They're already there, but you must do as much as you can to turn those enemies into partners for our future.
The questions that are hardest for me, can you hear me? Yeah. And this is the hardest for an analyst, of course, is the question I don't have an answer to. And I think that this situation, 7th of October, has left me with many open questions, as much as answers. I mean, I'm here to present an airtight, three-phased plan, a roadmap. And, that's why I really enjoyed our discussion, because it makes you think. When the analyst raises his voice with decisive tone, and that's exactly where, those places. I can give you two examples. I don't know how to explain to myself, to be completely honest, right? This is not just why most of my Palestinian colleagues after the 7th of October, some very close partners, did not call, or maybe called to me, privately and said, "Are you okay? Your family is okay, good," but wouldn't be able to speak against the atrocities of October 7th. I need to deal with it. If we are serious about peace, we need to deal with it. This is not a weakness. If you have a dogma and if you have a dichotomy as, good and bad, then you have a problem here, okay? Reality is much more complex. Most of us experiences on a daily basis. We need to deal with those questions. They're going to make us stronger when we speak with the right wing, So this is something that I is lingering in my mind since 7th of October. And I asked and spoke with my Palestinian colleagues about that. And, I'm not going to speak about the answers because it's not exactly, the right answers or the wrong one, but this is something, the entire issue of the hostages. This is a place that is very tough for me to admit that I don't have an answer. Because, on the one hand, this is the fabric and the reason for Israel to exist, to provide security to its citizens. You need to do everything you can in order to bring the hostages back. But for us who are dealing with the delicate negotiation between Israel and Hamas, and I agree completely with you that the government is not doing what it can do on this issue, we understand today that Hamas is using this specific card. They know very well that this is probably, Sinwar knows very well that this is the last card that keeps him alive. So it's not just about a question of all for all or price. You know, it's a much more complicated issue. Those issues, I think we need to be sincere enough and self-confident enough to deal with the complexities of the issues that we are dealing with. And then we will have the right to call for a change, you know? And I think that we can allow ourselves, when we build a new paradigm, to wait a second, not to provide automatic answers as the right wing is providing, but to actually debate those things and to examine them and even challenge our own basic assumptions. That's the advantage of being able to adapt to the situation. It's not easy to do so, because in order to do so, and this is one of the major obstacles, and I think you were relating to that, you need leadership. You need somebody who is able to come vis-a-vis our own constituency and say, wait a second, let's re-examine A and B if we are serious, to lead, to offer new ideas, to change your minds about certain things. You know, if you came here and you left, if we are just preaching to the choir, then we didn't really achieve our goal. And this is something that I don't recognize at the current moment in Israel. We might find it within the protest movement, outside of the Knesset. I agree with your analysis about the lack of leadership at the moment. But it's something that we need to be committed to be comfortable with the uncomfortable questions, basically.
The main thing that we are doing is speaking with the Israeli audience. So there's so many tough questions. But I think one of the main ones is there are two main ones. First of all, are you a Zionist organization? Because when they ask me that, usually before army service, like military academies, youth movement, high schools, when they ask me that, they are referring to a different kind of Zionism that I grew up on. They're talking about Jewish supremacy. This is what they're talking about. That's what they're asking me. Are we more important than everyone else? Are the settlements, are the true Zionism at the moment are important than anything else? And then you have to go to a history class. And I don't want to do it because I'm lecturing about other things. And it's the exact same question that is very hard. It's very annoying, I can say, is why do you speak abroad? I'm abroad at the moment. Why do you speak abroad? Because that folds in itself the entire idea that what we are doing to the Palestinians, it's our own secret, right? That we are not in 2024 and the world is transparent and there's social media, right? And all of that. It doesn't exist, right? Only if those couple of soldiers from Breaking the Silence would shut up their mouth, nobody would know what we're doing in our backyard. And that is something that we hear from especially young Israelis, because this is what they get inside their head, because our political system, because the right-wing politician, but I'm sorry to say the center politicians as well, right? There is a law that was passed against breaking the silence in the Israeli parliament, and it was passed by Yair Lapid. And it was a law to ban us to speak in high schools. Amazing, huh? Yair Lapid, that liberal. When soldiers are coming back home talking about what we did, no good, right? When we shut up, fly to South America, go to university, take a mortgage, find a wife, that's perfectly okay, right? And that is one of the problems when they ask me why you speak abroad, because they don't understand how it works, right? Friends around the world, Canadian government, the American government, I don't know, the Western European government, they're supposed to come to us and say, hey, whoa, you exaggerated. Let us help you, right? And that's one thing. And the other thing, again, it's that entire idea that we are basically the UN and we can decide who will get independence or not, and we can control the Palestinians as much as we want. And because we are doing it, again, quote unquote, for our security, so it's perfectly legitimate. That's it. And I think it's a tough question, because what it does, and this is exactly what the right wing wanted to happen. You won't speak about the occupation. I had to start explaining what is a democracy and how it works. And if it's okay or not okay, free speech and all of that. And I'm not talking about what is happening in the West Bank and Gaza, right? And that's why I have an answer to everything, but that's why it's a hard question, right? And one of the things that we experience a lot is in the disinformation that is being spread, or the fake news that is being spread against human rights organization in Israel or civil society organization in Israel for so many years. Turns out, it brings that to a point that sometimes half of the time that I have with the 18-year-olds is just to explain all of the lies against us and not talk about reality.
Thank you. So we have to wrap up. But I do want to ask a last question, and maybe just two of you will have a chance to answer this. And that is, and very quickly, what gives you hope? What enables you to continue this advocacy work that you do despite all the negativity around you? But very
quickly. When I speak with young Israelis and you see in their eyes question marks, right? Like, I didn't have because nobody spoke with me. That gives me hope, because they are the future, right? And they ask question. And I can tell you the exact same moment in Hebron, like when they step on the sidewalk, where their eyes are open when they see the city and all of the checkpoints and everything. And you can see they're like, whoa, I didn't got the full story. And that gives me hope, because that's change.
First of all, I think that we have no other choice. Like I talked about being this kind of like shadow of Oslo generation. And I think that there's almost no choice but to have hope. This is the reality. This is the card that we've been dealt as a Jewish community, as Israelis and Palestinians. This is the card that we've been dealt, and we have to play it. And we have to play it either way. So there's only, for me, I feel like there's only one option, which is to try and make a better reality as far as possible. But in terms of what helps me and brings me that hope, it's really morbid. So sorry about that. But what gives me hope is that when I look into all of your faces, when I'm speaking, for example, and this is just one example because there's so many realities that this is true of, when I'm speaking about children starving, the most harsh, the most horrific thing, and I see every single person is wincing and is hurt. And I think that's a human reaction, and that's universal. And I think that there's all of us in the region, globally, really feel a strong compulsion to make a better reality when we actually face the reality. And I think that's true of Israelis, it's true of Palestinians. No one has an interest in children not having the right to life. Everyone believes that that's important. And every single person that I communicate with about this gives me that same reaction. And that makes me believe in humanity so much.
Mauricio and Gil, can you, in 30 seconds each, say what gives you hope?
Yes, I actually can, and I must say that what gives me hope is people, and especially the people of Israel, that they are ready to fight for their country, for our country. And I must say that since the protest movement started, I became a protester. And I've been probably in more than 200 protests since all started, and I've seen it all. And I must say that every time, every Saturday night that I go down to Kaplan or to Begin or wherever the protest is, I feel the power of the people. And I believe, again, I don't believe in God, but I do believe in people. And I know that the Israeli people is wonderful people. And I think we should all be proud of that. And I hope that also Jewish communities in the world will join the efforts of the Israeli people, because we are one and our future is our joint future.
In 30 seconds?
30 seconds.
I draw hope from little moments, to be honest. I mean, otherwise it's exhausting to think about the big picture on each juncture and so on. So the people of Mitvim, I mean, the people that I have the privilege and honor to work with, just an amazing group. I mean, I don't know, like 12 hours after the 7th of October, they were already organizing. This was the first core of the Matei HaChatufim, of the hostages forum. People, former diplomats, who suddenly wanted to volunteer their knowledge to the families of the hostages to help them in their engagement with the Qataris, with the world leaders. And they did it as an instinct. It didn't take much thinking. I mean, they were just looking and yearning to do something productive. And I think this energy, I always said that it's such a waste, the lack of leadership in the left, because to harness this energy in the end, you need leadership. So I hope that for their sake, we'll find the leaders that could harness this unique energy. And also, I take a lot of hope from what I mentioned, this translation, this has just happened a couple of days ago, so it's really fresh. Finding out that one of the leaders, in the Palestinian side, in the PA, decided to translate the entire initiative to Arabic on his own initiative. He didn't tell us. And then when asked what the hell, then he comes and says, hey, I wanted, people to, I don't remember if I mentioned it or not, in which this guy mentioned. So yeah, this is, what I'm talking about.
Thank you so much. Thank you, all of you. You're quite really amazing. And I'm sure I speak for everybody that you give us hope.
Thank you.
Okay, so hope seems to be the word of the day. Please give a very appreciative round of applause to our panelists and to Gabriella. Thank you. You've helped us. You've helped us to see a narrow path to a day without war and conflict, a glimmer of hope in this sea of tragedy. And I think that's maybe what we're all going to walk away with from this afternoon. It's not a guarantee, though. Israelis and Palestinians need to do the job, but they need our help to get there. As Nadav said earlier, they need the world's help, and that means Canada's help too, your help. What can Canada do? Does our voice matter? Here to tell us that our voice does matter, here in Canada at the global level, and to Israelis and Palestinians working for a solution, please welcome Ambassador Jon Allen. And I'm going to give a little introduction. Jon Allen was born in Winnipeg. He has an LLB from the University of Western Ontario and an LLM in international law from the London School of Economics. He joined the then Department of External Affairs in 1981 and has had a long, distinguished, and wide-ranging career in the Foreign Service with assignments too numerous to list. But from 2006 to 2010, Jon was Canada's ambassador to Israel. He subsequently served as ambassador to Spain and Andorra and chargé d'affaires to the Holy See. And since his so-called retirement, he's currently a senior fellow at the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy here in Toronto. He's the chair of Project Rosanna, a not-for-profit whose objective is to build bridges between Palestinians and Israelis via the health sector. He's a member of the Advisory Council of the New Israel Fund of Canada, and he's the chair of the J-Space Canada Policy Center. So I'd like to welcome Jon to come up to speak and also to close out the conference.
Well, thank you, Linda. Thank you, everybody, for hanging in here. I know I'm the only thing between me and dinner, and you're probably all pretty tired. I'll tell you what gives me hope. What gives me hope is listening to 4 amazing Israelis who can speak about peace and can fight for peace and can advocate for peace. And I just want to congratulate all of you for everything that you do. It's fabulous, and thank you very much. And those speakers have made it clear that those advocating for peace in Israel need our support, just as Israelis needed our support during the 39 weeks of protests before October 7. So I've been asked to say a few words about the Canadian government's policies, where they are and where we would like them to be going forward. First of all, it's worth noting that the government has recently adopted some pretty progressive positions. Rather than remaining silent regarding the current situation on the ground in Gaza and in the West Bank, as our friends at some other organizations in Canada would wish. The government has made it clear that it supports a ceasefire as the best way to achieve the release of the hostages, to increase the delivery of humanitarian assistance, and to reduce the numbers of innocent dead and injured Palestinians. In recognition of the dire needs in Gaza and the role that UNRWA plays in the distribution of humanitarian assistance, Canada was among the first countries to renew funding for that organization without first passing judgment on the outcome of the ongoing investigations into some of its employees. It is now more vocal and is prepared to act in its opposition to settler violence in the West Bank. And I should make it clear that all of these actions are fully consistent with current and past government policy on the Middle East, which supports a two-state solution, opposes the occupation, and considers the settlements, all of the settlements, illegal at international law. Indeed, these policies were in place when I was ambassador in 2006. That said, we three organizations, JSpace Canada, New Israel Fund, and Canadians for Peace Now, believe that Canada can and should do more. For example, it should join with other like-minded nations, the Americans, the Australians, the Brits, and the New Zealanders, to continue to push for a ceasefire, a return of the hostages, and a surge in humanitarian aid. It should make clear that any further settlement expansion and settler violence will be met with strong Canadian and international condemnation and action to sanction those involved. Canada should also begin labeling goods produced in Israel's settlements as made in the occupied West Bank. And again, in concert with its allies, Canada should advocate for a concrete plan for the day after in Gaza, a plan that includes a strong, revitalized Palestinian Authority. And to make that real, Canada should join the international community to bolster PA governance, to support free and fair elections in the West Bank, and to assist in tackling the corruption and the nepotism that have characterized the Palestinian Authority for too long. While planning for it now, Canada should significantly increase its bilateral and multilateral funding to assist in the day after rebuilding of Gaza and the provision of the massive requirements for humanitarian aid that will be required. A significant portion of that funding should go to civil society organizations like Project Rosanna, the one I happen to chair, and others like it that can provide direct mental health, nutrition, and other social services that will be desperately needed in Gaza. The overall requirements will be in the tens of billions of dollars, and delivering it quickly and efficiently will be the best way to begin to win the hearts and minds of Gazans and demonstrate that there are worthy alternatives to Hamas rule. Thanks to our good sense policy recommendations and the hard work of Canadians for Peace Now, New Israel Fund, and JSpace, we progressives now have the ears of the Canadian government and an increasing number of moderate Canadian Jews. Together, we have helped move the government to take positions that will advance peace in the region rather than further polarize it. Staying silent on critical issues that impact the lives of Israelis and Palestinians is unacceptable. as Jews, who want Israel to be able to live in peace and security alongside an independent Palestinian state, it's important that we speak up and encourage our government to do the same. It's key for Canada's moderate Jewish voices to continue to be heard, and for you, progressive Jewry in Canada, through our sponsoring agencies, to support those moderate voices. It's also important that our Palestinian, Muslim, and Arab friends and all non-Jews in Canada understand that there are strong progressive Jewish voices here that support Palestinian self-determination, 2 states, and full equality rights for all within the Green Line. Peace-loving Israelis need our help, and our 3 organizations need your help to be able to continue our work. An action alert from JSpace Canada is appearing in your inboxes as I am speaking. It includes 4 specific calls for action to be sent to your member of parliament. Please look for it as soon as I stop speaking and sign on as quickly as possible. Many, many thanks to our speakers, to our organizers, to our moderators, and especially to you here and online for joining us. Keep up the fight. We shall win.
Hey, thank you everyone for coming. And please heed the call from Jon, and thank you all. And we look forward to seeing you again at the next whatever event. Thank you.